Now, one of What is happening, everybody? This is Dave Croft, and welcome to the 52 Qs podcast, where each week we are talking about all things production and library music, whether you are a grizzled veteran of the sync world, or maybe you're brand new and you're just exploring the space. Either way, I promise you, you are absolutely in the right place. It is so good to be with you. We are live again. And we are doing a Q&A, an Ask Dave Anything. We do these once a couple times a year, every other quarter or so. But we've got some folks in the chat room. What is good? We've got Chris, we've got Jeff, we've got Reed. What is going on? Also, we've got some questions from some YouTube comments. We got some questions that were sent up to the community over at 52 Qs, and we're going to be going for about an hour or so, or until the questions run out. But it is so good to be with you today. And of course, as always, a huge word of thanks to our family, friends, and neighbors, subscribers of 52 Qs, who are composers just like you, working to get better at production and library music and make a career in the sync industry. And 52 Qs is there to help with live streams, workshops, Zoom feedback sessions, hours and hours of video archives, as well as pitching to real music libraries. So if this is something that you're interested in, why don't you head over to 52qs.com and join us. We would absolutely love to have you. So like I said, we're going to be going for about an hour here. Happy to answer any questions at all. Ask me anything. That's totally good. And how are we doing, chat room? Good to see Yuka. Good to see Steve, Mr. Haddocks. Yeah, folks in the chat talking about a new briefing room brief that we just launched. That is going out with a super quick turnaround. We call our briefing room briefs. Well, typically, if you're not familiar how our briefing room works. And what the briefing room is, it's a feature of our family subscription where we pitch and write to real music library briefs. And so we have briefs that we send along, and they have different rounds of submissions, and there's feedback with revisions and everything else. So those are just our standard briefs, usually 6 to 8 week window. And we always try to keep at least one brief cooking at all times. But every now and then we get a publisher who needs like a lightning fast turnaround, like within a week or so. or in this case, about a week and a half or 2 weeks. And so we throw up the bat signal. So I call them bat signal briefs. And this is, and I always put like a Batman GIF or something like that. So that's what's happening. That's what they're talking about in the chat, and it's really, really good to see. Hectic Zeniths is with us. Dead Rock Stars, what is good? Ray is with us, also calling from Central Florida. Corey D, what is up, my friend? It is so good to be with everybody today. So let's go ahead and jump into the questions. Our first question comes from a 52Qs member. This is Lisa, and Lisa says, I have a question about pianos. When is it best to separate the piano into left hand and right hand separate tracks for frequency or mixing reasons? I'm thinking that I could have two different piano experiences to load. One that is full keyboard for very piano dominant or lead pieces. That would be all on one track. It's almost impossible to pull apart a piano part like that. Then I could create another piano to load where the piano is split between the low and the high tracks in a balanced stack with separate EQs for pieces where I use the piano as an accompaniment / enhancer and not as the lead instrument. And this would give me flexibility to EQ the highs and lows as required. Anyway, any thoughts would be appreciated. Many thanks for considering my question. Well, first of all, Lisa, thank you so much for sending your question, and thank you for your continued support over in the community. I think it depends on the type of cue that you are writing. If you are writing a very specific piano solo cue, then it doesn't necessarily make sense to split those for EQ reasons, because it should be mixed as if it is one instrument. So if it's a piano solo or maybe a very piano heavy cue and we're doing time stretching, and it feels much more like an organic piano performance versus like a light tension cue or a dramedy cue or something like this. My way of thinking is anything that I know that future Dave is going to need to isolate and put into its own stem, usually either with all of the bass sounds or if I need to take out low sounds and have a bass and drums or a rhythm section stem, then I will isolate the low end of the piano, typically the left hand, because I'm not playing a bunch of cross-handed stuff because I'm not a pianist, right? But if I have like low octaves down there and I'm supporting the harmony, then I will put that onto its own track. Now, you could, for stemming purposes, you could go in and I suppose forensically mute or solo sounds that you need, but I have found that it is the risk of error and the risk of forgetting to turn something on or misclicking or accidentally deleting something or moving something, or you're typing and you're working really fast and you hit Q and now everything is requantized. That can get really, really dicey. So I have found that I separate my left-hand piano into its own track and my right hand or my higher pianos into its own track. I don't necessarily do it for EQ reasons, because typically the piano needs to be EQ'd as one whole instrument, but it does make it easier to EQ the low end, especially if you have other bass instruments and you have to make sure that they all kind of snap together like puzzle pieces. But I do it for delivery reasons and for stem reasons. And you can actually extrapolate this across all of your parts. So if you have a low end, if you have a pad sound, for example, that really crosses the frequency spectrum, then I would isolate my high sounds from my low sounds, my high pads from my low pads, my high marimba from my low marimba, my high strings from my low strings, my high piano and my low piano, because I know that future Dave is going to need to go in and isolate all of those low end sounds into a bass stem or a drums and bass only or percussion and bass only stem. And so by separating them, it just makes it easier. It's easier to solo the tracks versus going into individual regions and isolating. So Lisa, again, thank you so much for the question. Really, really do appreciate you sending that along. For folks in the chat, good to see Dinko, good to see Eric. What is happening? Let's see, anybody else? Yeah, good to see everybody. If you have any questions, please let me know in the chat. Happy to answer those questions, and it's what I'm here to do. Again, ask me anything. I'm an open book. What's good, Jens? Really, really good to see you. Let's see. We had a message or a comment from James Taylor, who commented on my Understanding Ominous Tension Cues episode from last year, week 47. And he said, I'm struggling when it comes to layering. I understand that I want to add to previous phrases to increase energy before the breakdown, but not quite understanding how to get my mind away from being overly repetitive. Any suggestions that can get my mind to open up? Well, James, thank you so much for sending along the question. Really, really do appreciate it. And I think repetition isn't quite as radioactive or toxic in the production music space as it might be like in pop or in songwriting. But I think about, as we are layering, we have a couple of different levers we can pull when we are layering to create interest. One is to add a new layer. So if you start with piano, then the next phrase, you start with like the piano and the bass, and then the next phrase, you add some strings, and the next phrase, you add marimba. And so over the course of the first, third to half of the cue, we are slowly building up energy into the cue. All right, so that's one lever we can pull when we are layering. The other lever we can pull when we're looking to create a sense of musical development, when we don't want to shift mood, we don't want to shift out of key signature, we don't want to shift, a bunch of chords. Another lever we can pull is density into the layering. And I have found that, let me back up. What I mean by density into the layering is you start with one octave and then you add another layer, like go into 2 octaves. And let me pull up a session that I worked on just earlier today. I was showing my Full Sail students this cue, and this is called a Cat Got Ya Tongue. It is a dramedy cue, a kind of a hip hop dramedy cue. And I can show you what I mean when I talk about density layering. So let me, I'm pulling that up in the background. But essentially, if we go to our example where we start with the piano and then we add piano and bass and then we add piano, bass, and marimba, instead of just rotely layering, so it feels like we're just like a Christmas tree. Every 4 bars, we're just adding new layers. But if we add density into the layers that we already have, then it creates interest very creatively inexpensive, if that makes sense. All right, so here's the cue. We were actually just listening to it on the previous. All right, so we have our main melody here. And so we build upon that. And then 4 bars later, we build again. And then 4 bars later, we build again. But you'll notice when we come to the third or fourth iteration, we add octaves. And so when you blend that with density layering and texture layering or instrument layering, so here we're starting with just the percussion, the melody, we add a little beat, we add some Motown bass, some kind of mystery vibraphone, and now we're kind of done with the intro, and now we're into it properly. I did add, this is some funky drummer right there. All right, so we added an additional gear of energy by doubling up our octave in our main melody. So we went from single octaves to double octaves. And my harmony has single octaves then I layered in more octaves, or I layered in on top of it on another instrument. So it's another instrument, but it's doing the same thing, and that creates a sense of density. All right, so if we fast forward, get to the other side of the breakdown, we go back into single melody, double melody with the harmony, double melody with the harmony, and we've added even more layers into the pizzicato harmony. And so by pulling these different levers, adding new regions, adding new tracks and layers, and adding density into the layers that we already have, doing those kind of hand in hand helps to keep things from feeling, in my opinion, from feeling too repetitive. And so yeah, I hope that was helpful. Hope that was helpful for you. One of the challenges, the cue that I was talking about or showing you during this was ominous tension. And so ominous tension can be challenging because you often only have certain number of layers because it's ominous and kind of ambient and that kind of thing. All right, so James, really do appreciate it, and James is also a Full Sail student, and really good to see Full Sail peeps over here in the YouTube space. So thank you so much, James. Let's see. Eric asked a question for you if you get a chance. When I register a cue that is intended for TV or film, should I declare that when I register the composition? Should I declare that when I register the composition with BMI, it is an option in their form? So Eric, I am assuming that you are registering with the PRO, but in my experience, for 99.5% of the time, the library is going to be registering with the PRO. In fact, if you register that cue with the PRO, it could get in the way of things, and you don't want to kind of put sand in the gears. So I don't ever register my cues with PROs, and so the library takes care of that. If you do, if they are registered, then when you submit it to the library, tell them that it's registered. But the library typically needs to do their own registration for the PRO because they're entering in, especially if you're with an exclusive library, they are entering in their own publisher information. Whereas if you're registering it, then you are putting in your publisher information or you're leaving it blank. But as far as declare that it's intended for TV or film, I don't know, because I've never registered anything with BMI. The only registrations I have ever done have been through ASCAP, and I don't recall there being like the intended use. That having been said, go for it. If it truly is the intended use that you are going to be on film and TV, then yeah, go for it. I would say so. But I would hold off until you know that you need to register it yourself and not the library. Eric. So thank you, Eric. Really do appreciate that. Looks like we've got a question from Corey. Corey D says, researching libraries to potentially find the right fit for my tracks. How many submissions do you recommend doing at a time, since they may or may not reply? Wow, this is such a big topic that has a lot of kind of layers, and there's some different rules of thought, or schools of thought, I should say. Rules of thumb, schools of thought. One of them is, how many cues do you put in? Do you pitch a whole album? Do you pitch just a handful of them? To that, I would say my personal opinion is you should pitch 3 tracks to the library that you're pitching to, but have an album completed. So if they say yes, then you can open up your suitcase and say, look at all these cues that I have for you. And it makes it really simple. What libraries don't want when you are pitching is they don't necessarily, want a whole giant playlist of everything. This isn't your portfolio. You're not inviting somebody to look at what you can do. You're not inviting a library to look at what you have done. You are pitching to a library to say, this is what I have that is available that I think you should have. And so having 2 or 3 cues and a very highly focused, not handwritten, but custom written email. Don't use form letters. Use AI, with the understanding that it can help with grammar and that kind of thing. But you don't want to depend on AI. But I'm telling you guys, Libraries can absolutely sniff out form letters. So don't use that. Yeah, Corey says, I meant how many libraries. Yeah, I tangented there. The fundamental question is how many do you do at a time? If you are pitching custom, with a custom pitch, I would do those one at a time. Because the absolute last thing you want to do is pitch to a library and say, man, these cues that I wrote, they're like the perfect fit. And I think you're going to love them. They're just for you. And then they get back to you in 2 or 3 weeks and they're like, yeah, we'd love them. Thanks so much. And you're like, oh, sorry. I've already given them to someone else. And that can absolutely sour the relationship. It's like asking, four girls at once to the prom, and you told each one that they're the most important person, and then they all say yes, and you have to pick one, and it's weird. Which means you might have some cues that are kind of tied up until you hear back. This is a little bit different from like the taxi approach, because with the taxi, that is somewhat more of an open submission kind of cattle call, and everybody is all pitching at once. And my philosophy is, and I don't know if this is wrong, but I feel like how to say this? I'm going to take a sip of coffee to make sure that I don't say something I don't necessarily mean. If the libraries that receive the forward are not obligated to give you a yes or no, then you are not obligated to keep it exclusively for that forward. Maybe that's a wrong way of thinking about it, but let me say that again. When you get a taxi forward, everybody knows that you don't hear back from the library, which can lead to some frustration. I talked about it a couple of years ago, my whole year of taxi and all that stuff, right? I get it. It can be really frustrating for your forward to kind of go into the void and hear nothing. That having been said, if the forwarded publisher or library does not have an obligation to tell you yes or no, then you are under no obligation to hold that cue for that forwarded library. So that's the taxi situation, which can kind of create a distortion field of how the process could work with some libraries. But if you are custom pitching, then that's a completely different situation. If you are custom pitching, then you are asking a girl out to the prom. And so you need to wait for them to say yes or no, which begs the question, how long should I wait? Well, my recommendation is to wait a couple of weeks after the pitch and then have a follow-up. Hey, not to like, did you hear my stuff yet? Not like that, but just saying, hey, just following up. Wanted to make sure that you received my previous email. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. Want to make sure it didn't get caught in your spam filter or whatever. And then after another 2 weeks, right? So we are after another 2 weeks, so we're a month after the pitch, send up a follow-up email practically saying the same thing. And then at that point, you could either wait another couple of weeks and send them another message. This is, of course, assuming you hear nothing. If they get back to you and then they say that, hey, got your email, haven't listened to it yet, but we'll get to it, then that timer kind of resets. You know what I'm saying? So 2 weeks after radio silence, that's when you send the first message. Then 2 weeks after that, send the follow-up message. If you get a message, then that resets that timer. After the second follow-up, if it's radio silence, I would probably give it probably another 2 weeks, because these libraries are busy, and in our mind we have a picture of a bunch of people all in an office, right? And this is like this bustling kind of newsroom energy, but it's really not. Libraries tend to be very small companies, mostly a handful of people, and they are working a ton, and they're probably taking in a ton of submissions. So we're now at the end of a month, so 4 weeks. I think it's up to you whether you want to send one final follow up, and don't get all threatening and weird. Basically, and you could say, hey, I just wanted to send up one final message to see if you were interested in the cues. So you send the first pitch email. 2 weeks later is a follow up that's basically saying, hey, wanted to make sure you saw the message. Happy to answer any questions. The third follow up would be, or first week, 2 weeks is did you get the message? After 2 weeks after that, that's the basically, hey, wanted to send another message, give you, to just reach out one more time to see if you were interested in the queue. So if that makes any sense, I kind of pretzel logicked my way around and I got lost. But you should wait. You do not want to get two responses to the same dance at the same time, and now you're going to end up pissing them both off. Then none of the girls are going to want to dance with you. Corey said, sounds like follow-ups are okay. Follow-ups are totally okay. In fact, any library worth working with is going to be thankful for a polite, professional, jovial, casual kind of a follow-up. Again, not as a pestering, but just saying, hey, just wanted to follow up. If they're like me, they'll appreciate the nudge and they'll go, oh, that's right. I saw the email come in. Here's what happens with me. If you've ever sent me an email or a message on Midi or something like that up in the community and you're wondering, why hasn't he gotten back to me? 9 times out of 10, I see the message. It's not anything that I can comment or respond to within just a couple of minutes. So I mentally make it a to-do for future Dave. But you get enough messages and then that email or that message falls kind of below the fold and it goes a little out of sight, out of mind. So a follow-up message basically bumps that email and that communication back to the top. So yep, for sure. Reed says, I'm just going to take all 4 to the prom. Nice. Reed's a player, man. Corey says, I created a disco playlist specifically for the pitch so I can see if it's been played or not. Is that helpful? That is very helpful. I wouldn't necessarily use that as kind of leverage. I see you liked it. Did you like it? Let me know, right? That's like asking somebody to the prom by sending them a letter or a message that says, do you like me? Circle yes or no. And you've watched them open, right? That gets a little desperate feeling. If you send it along and you can tell that they've listened to it, but then you don't hear back from them, then that kind of jumps forward to the end. Instead of did you get the message? Because you can prove to yourself that they did get the message. And so I would just wanted to send a final follow-up or just a follow-up to see if you had any questions. And then if they're still not interested and if they're ghosting you, then yeah, I would pitch it to someone else. Now, what happens if the lead starts heating up a little bit? Well, a cool lead is better than a cold lead, and a warm lead is better than a cool lead. A hot lead is better than a warm lead, and a red hot lead. Okay, so a cold lead is radio silence. There's a library that takes unsolicited submissions, and so you submitted it, you've got nothing. You can't tell if they've looked at it, you can't tell if they listened to it, like through Disco or RealCrafter or something like that. That's a cold lead. A cool lead is you've gotten a response from them, but you haven't gotten an affirmative or not. It's one of those, I got your message, just want to let you know it's on my to-do list or it's on the radar. That's a cool lead. It's not ice cold, but it's cool. A warm lead is got your message, listened through some things. I like what I hear, but I'm not ready to make a decision. That's a warm lead. And warm leads can be fanned, into hot leads. Hot leads are, like your stuff, please, let's go ahead and sign it and send it my way. That's a hot lead. A red hot lead, a volcanic lead, is after a while, now you are getting briefs. They are reaching out to you saying, we want you to do this. That is a red hot, lava hot lead. So I don't know if that makes sense, but cold to cool to warm to hot to red hot. And so the only thing you really can't do, you can't take a cold lead and fan it into a warm lead or even a cool lead. If it's cold, like you said, soft inquiries. Corey said, gotcha, soft inquiries. Yeah, if it's cold, just be cool, just nice and professional. Don't get too pushy. If it starts warming up a little bit, then you can kind of reach out a little bit more directly. Okay. All right, Jeff asked a question over here in the community. Jeff asked, if a composer has gotten back some cues that were previously signed to a publisher and even placed on shows, the reversion clause, publisher going out of the business, so you were able to get the cues back, can that composer still pitch those cues to an exclusive library? Those cues are probably still living on hard drives of editors or supervisors, so I'm guessing there will be some confusion if those identical cues get pitched to the same shows by different publishers. Well, I think it really depends on whether, if the publisher went out of business or if there was a reversion clause. Let's start with going out of business. If a library goes out of business, typically all of the licensing agreements that the publisher had with a production company are dissolved. They're no longer valid because there's nobody on the other side of that contract to execute the contract, right? And so at that point, if the company is not sold somewhere and those assets aren't transferred, which is very, very unlikely, but assuming that the assets aren't transferred, then the production companies legally cannot use the cues that were licensed to the company that's gone out of business. So they would have to enter into contracts with whatever new company. If there is no new company, could those cues still be living on a hard drive? Technically, yes, but the production company should know that the license that originally covered this music usage is no longer valid. So I think at that point, you're probably safe. Now, as far as a reversion clause, that's interesting. And in case, if you're watching this and you're like, what's a reversion clause? A reversion clause is a clause that lives in a contract, and you don't see them a ton. I know in the contracts that we have with the composers through the briefing room and 52 Qs and publishing and all that stuff, I did have a reversion clause, or we do have a reversion clause that states after a certain amount of time, or if a Q has not made enough money, like a certain target of money, then the composer can request the Q back. Basically, you can have it back, the copyright, the license that the publisher has to represent your music gets reverted, and you can then take that somewhere else. You can either pitch it yourself, you can pitch it to another exclusive library. How reversion clauses get executed to the licensee? That's an interesting question. I don't know. That sounds like a question for Biagio, because I don't know if he is going in and asking, does this still on there? This is probably why reversion clauses aren't that common. But I would definitely check with that. And if you have a library that has a reversion clause, then it might be worth asking how is that going to get enforced if you were to revert it. Now, all of that having been said, in the nearly 800 Qs and 12 years of doing this that I've had, publishing and contracts, I've only executed a reversion clause once, and that was a Q that had never been placed, and I wanted it back because I had a red hot lead for another publisher. And so I executed my reversion clause, got it back. They removed it. It never got placed. And so there's no issue. My gut tells me that if the reversion clause gets executed and the library and you've pitched it to someone else, and another catalog has it, because your PRO and your IPI is attached to the cue itself, and your IPI number is unique to you, then it would just mean that the publishing and everything would go to the new library. That would be my guess. Is the cue sheet information still current? That's a good question, and I don't know for sure. Would it cause some confusion? It could, if the identical cues get pitched to the same show. For me, I personally don't think it's worth chasing down a cue using a reversion clause that has been placed at some point. Because if it has been placed, then it's safe to assume that the cue is sitting in editing bays, with editors, and just leave well enough alone. However, if the cue hasn't been placed, and usually reversion clauses are like 5 years. The contracts we signed for the 52 cues composers, it's a 5-year reversion clause and a certain dollar threshold. And I can't remember what the dollar threshold is. It might be $100 or $500. I'd have to look at it, meaning the amount of royalties or sync fees and that kind of thing that it's amassed. But after 5 years, if you are still tracking it and it hasn't gotten placements, then yeah, you can ask for it. My philosophy is let sleeping dogs lie and kind of move on. But that's a great question, Jeff. Really do appreciate you asking that. All right, let's see. Hectic asked, there must be some time limit where you move on without a response, though. I had an offer for an album 4 months after sending, and I had to say it was already signed. I think that's unreasonable. Oh, you're absolutely right. Kind of going back to Corey's question. Yeah, if it's 4 months and you've gotten like radio silence, then that's on them. Then that's on them. And I don't think that's unreasonable at all I don't think you are being unreasonable to move on and pitch it somewhere else. Now, if they are reaching out to you and every few weeks they're like, "Yep, we're still on it," then I would keep up with it. But if it's radio silence for 4 months, even after a yes and after you have followed up, again, make sure you're doing your own due diligence here and you are following up. Because if you're not, then the library might just be assuming that everything's, copacetic, and now suddenly they go to finally publish it because they finally got to it on their to-do list, and then you're like, sorry. Then like, oh man, so that's not a great look in my opinion. But if it's been radio silence for 4 months, yeah, absolutely, yeah, that's not great business on the library's part. Let's see. Dinko asked, how important do you think it is to include a B part or a B theme in a dramedy genre? Some libraries I work with prefer sticking to a single musical motif throughout the entire track. I find sticking to one central thematic motif throughout the entire cue is best, especially with tension cues and with dramedy cues being on the tension spectrum. I feel like it just works best. How do you create a B section? Well, that's, the cue that we've got looking at over here, the cat got ya tongue, it builds up over time. And the B section is created not by incorporating new thematic material, but by just removing material. So going to this. And it's all the same parts. It's all the same, different phrases, but by pulling things out of the foreground, then these background elements get elevated to where they almost sound like B material. Now, that having been said, that gets a little different if you are doing, obviously if you're doing vocal songs, or if you're doing even like main titles and themes. They tend to have proper B section like you would learn if you're writing more kind of traditional compositional, quote unquote, classical or concert type of approach, where you have an A theme, you could have a B theme and a C theme that's in a complementary key signature or a relative minor or parallel or whatever. So there are schools of composition that works. But really, if you think of it this way, imagine you are an editor and you are putting a scene together, and every scene on television has a beginning, a middle, and an end. It could be a 3-act structure, but typically a scene in a story has a sense of rising action as the cue progresses. And each scene is typically around a set in a certain setting, or it's telling just one part of the story, or if it's just one emotion. This might be a scene where somebody is confronting, somebody that they have an argument with, or a scene where somebody is confronting whether or not they can install broadband internet, but over the course of the scene, there's rising action. It could be tension, it could be humor, it could be, melancholy, sadness, happiness, whatever, but there is a sense of rising action throughout the scene. And we want our cues to represent that somewhat, but also not pull out of the emotional center of what the cue is about. Because if you're an editor and you have a scene and you find a cue that really, really works, and you need the cue to predictably increase in energy, increase in tension, heighten emotion throughout without changing emotion. And we do that through layering and through, arrangement. And so going to a B section where we just take things away gives an editor options of different energetic levels without zinging off into a new mood or a new emotion. And so I find very, very rarely that I will write B sections that have proper, like a counter melody or a B melody. So like we have A theme, an A theme, and then a B theme, and then maybe an A theme. But it really depends on the type of cue that you are writing. I think different types of cues allow for different thematic materials like that. Does that make sense? I hope so. Excellent, excellent. Got another question from Jeff. Since vocal cues are more likely to generate sync fees than instrumental cues, would it be unwise to sign vocal songs to libraries who keep 100% of any sync fees? That is certainly a question worth asking. And typically, like for example, if you're writing music for The Ultimatum or for Love is Blind or Black Ink Crew or Temptation Island or whatever, often the library isn't necessarily getting upfront sync fees like you would find in a vocal placement or a trailer placement. In fact, you might not get any upfront sync fees at all, especially if it's not source music, where it's like a popular artist, and so the production company wants to license a certain song from a certain artist. They will pay a sync fee, and then they also get back end. To answer your question, because vocal music is kind of in the middle, I think it's worth asking the library. Yep, I think it's worth asking the library for sure. In the case, I think of what you're asking, that's a question that I can certainly pass on. Yep. But in other applications, like with tension cues, dramedy cues, there is no sync fees associated with it at all, and so, yeah, writing plucky dramedy cues for a background scene. But that's a great question, Jeff, that I will ask the publisher. Mr. Haddix asks, are B parts good to have in sports? I treat B parts very similarly to the way that in sports cues as I do in my dramedy cues. And let me pull up another cue. This is a hip hop cue that is still in progress. This is one that I wrote for the students at Full Sail to show them kind of epic energy hip hop. For me, I think it depends on the type of sports placement. If it is like graphics or highlight cues, that kind of thing, then typically you don't want proper B sections, especially if it's like hip hop EDM. But if it's like tropical house or pop, you would probably want B sections, and rock, you would probably want B sections. But here's a cue, and this isn't like fully polished yet, but you can get an idea for this, for the type of cue. By the way, you can see the layering and everything going on in this cue. All right, so we go forward, we go forward again, we go forward again, adding density, adding layering. And by the way, I'm adding density using these track alternatives. These are kind of like gears of energy here, and I find them super helpful in Logic. Anyway, so when I go to the breakdown here, so this is the final phrase. And so this would be like an epic orchestral hip hop cue for highlights or graphics. So going into the B section, and so what I've done here is I have killed the melody, because I always kill the melody in my B section, but I do have kind of a counter melody. It's really a supporting figure for the horns. Let me back this up and I'll play it again. All right, and then we're going to build it with harmonies and everything else. One of the things that I love to do at the end of my breakdowns is introduce melodic fragments. Now I'm about to reintroduce my primary hook, and I'm going to ditch my counter melody. And then bring in my counter melody. So I will hold off on this counter melody, or in this instance, these supporting horn figures. I will hold off, introduce them in the B section, which is kind of a breakdown, and then bring them together at the end of the cue. So what you end up with is an A, a B, and then ultimately an A plus B. Because one of the ways that I write these kind of epic orchestral hip hop cues is I will first start by writing the loops themselves. So just my loop layers, or I call them kind of like loop towers, essentially, and they have all of my parts together. And then when I go to do my arrangement, I do like a subtractive arrangement where I'll copy all of these phrases throughout the entire cue, and then just remove what I don't want. And it's a subtractive approach to arranging. Yeah. So, but if you are writing a rock cue, for example, or if you are writing like a pop or like a pop type cue, then B sections, which are a little bit more proper B sections, I think are in order. And even if you were doing like contemporary hip hop cues, basically the more or the closer your cue gets to a commercially released sound, then the more the expectation is that it will resemble more of a commercially released song form, right? So while we can certainly apply the ABA structure to hip hop cues, to contemporary hip hop cues, to high energy pop EDM hip hop cues, even epic hip hop cues like this, but you are not necessarily going to hear this type of a cue like on the radio necessarily. You know what I'm saying? Like nobody's like writing music like this. It's just very much in a film and TV, you know, Fast and the Furious or football music kind of approach. So you can have kind of a larger ABA, but if you're writing something, again, pop, if you're writing rock, if you're writing contemporary hip hop, then it opens the door to use much more of a verse, chorus, bridge type of an approach to a more of a commercially released song form. And in that case, then you would you could get away with a proper B section. Still, even though with me, I still pretty much stick to my breakdowns being removing instruments as opposed to zinging off into another direction. But great question, Mr. Haddix. Appreciate that. Pete asks, hi Dave, I'm curious what spec your Mac Studio is and if it has more than enough power for my productions. Well, I got my computer in August of 2022, I believe. It's a Mac Studio M1, and let me actually open it up here. Mac Studio M1, I do have 64 gigabytes of RAM, and I got the M1 Max, and it is a 2022. And at the time, I think 64 gigs was the most you could add. I do have a 2 terabyte hard drive, and I think it's more than enough for what I'm doing. And I feel like if I run into any bottlenecks, it's more a product of optimization than it is the CPU throttling, if that makes sense. Because the M1s are pretty darn powerful. But I tell you what's made me take a look is the new M4s. And it has to do with the amount of, what is it called? Performance cores versus utility cores. And the M2s and the M3, the Apple Silicon M2 and M3, their performance versus enhancement, whatever cores, weren't quite what I liked. But the M1s have like a ton of performance cores. And so when you're using Logic, or if you're using, especially during rendering videos, bouncing down files, looking at the performance cores, I think is super important to make sure that you get the most out of it. But the M1, I have zero regrets in getting the M1. The M4 minis look pretty darn impressive. Look really, really impressive. So I'm looking at that. Mrs. 52Q's, Shannon, who has like a completely decked out iMac, the last generation before switching over to the M1s because the M1s hadn't been released yet. And the new M4 minis would compute circles around that decked out Intel machine. So yeah, I think it's more than powerful enough. I would get an M1 or an M2. Probably wouldn't get an M3 at this point, but the M4 minis are pretty darn sexy. They're pretty good. They're really, really good, especially for what we're doing. I love my M1. I could probably get another 2 years out of it. I kind of wish I would have bit the bullet and gotten the Ultra, but the Ultra was almost like twice the price, and I couldn't do that. Jeff asks, is there an M4 Max? I think there's a Max, but there's not an M4 Ultra. The Ultras right now, the latest generation of Ultras are M3s, and because the Ultras are basically two Maxes kind of glued together. Let me see what we have. Looking over here, let's see the new Mac Studios. Do they have the M4? Yeah, the M4 Max Studio and the M3 Ultra. So if you wanted to kind of spec it out, you could go with the M3 Ultra, which is 28 core CPU, 60 core GPU. Let's see, total of 96 gigs of memory. I would go for the M4 Max over the M3, and it's like half the price. And I would deck it out to the 16 core, and I would max out the memory as much as I could. 128 gigs of memory. Yeah, over that gets a little crazy as why you would need that much memory. Of course, Bill Gates famously said once upon a time, like, nobody's going to need more than 2 megabytes of memory or 5 megabytes of memory. But even now, you're getting to $3,500, which is still less than the starting price of the M3 Ultra. Yeah, I think the Ultra machines for the Mac, the Ultra machines are really for people who are doing a lot of rendering and like dealing with like 8K video and some really giant, like one file is 8 gigabytes, just the one file. And so you really do need a lot of heft. In the music production space, we're not really dealing with that a lot. So I think it's kind of overkill. The follow-up question was, or Corey says, my M1 doesn't like too many plugins at once. Again, I think it depends on the plugin. I've noticed that the M1s really respond well to buffer size, I/O buffer. And again, it depends on the plugin. If I'm running a lot of Omnisphere instances, my computer's gonna punch me in the nuts. If I'm running Serum 2 and I have, multi-unison granular synths, with multiple voices, like 7 voices and 3 granular oscillators or a spec, then my computer's going to punch me, right? But the I/O buffer size helps. I keep my buffer around 256, and as long as I engage low latency mode when I am recording, I'm in good shape. If you are running into issues, my recommendation would be to, while you are writing, you engage low latency mode, maybe bounce into place, freeze tracks or whatever, and then when you are done actually writing, meaning you're not going to go recording where latency is an issue, then max out your buffer size. And this is something that I need to be better with. I think doing the buffer size tap dance is something we should probably get a little bit more used to. But if you're like me, I kind of stuck it at 256, and if it's not that, then I'm like, oh, what are you doing? What, computer? You're better than this. But if I would max out my I/O buffer, and then it will give me a ton more headroom. And so yeah. But Jeff, yeah, there is an M4 Max, and that's, if I were to buy one right now, I would probably get an M4 Max. I'm going to be looking to get another couple of years off my machine. Yep. So, or a year and a half. Basically, if I could get 4 years out of the not top of the line, then we'll be in good shape. I mean, I got like 6 or 7 years from my old Intel iMac before it was time, to give up the ghost. Dinko asked, sorry if I missed it, but have you made a video about the gear you're using? If not, would you consider making one? I've been meaning to make kind of a studio tour video. I know when we had the family reunion last year and again this year, where we had family members come to Orlando and hang out with me for the weekend, and we grilled out and hung out by the pool and all of that kind of stuff. But I did kind of a walking, a little mini tour. I need to do that. I need to do it. Part of the reason I haven't done it is I want to do it right, and I want the video to look good. But also, if you look like just out of frame, it's pretty rough. And I think folks in the community can second this. It's a mess just out of frame. Yeah, I've got like, I see Troy, Mr. Troy Dares hanging out in the chat. It's good to see you, brother. But yeah, I have a fishing tackle box full of drum detritus, like felts and snare wires and beaters and lugs and drum keys that's just open because in a fit of frenzy, I had to panically go through my whole system or all of my equipment because I needed to replace a cymbal felt. And so it's a real mess right now. That's why I don't have it over there. I should though. I absolutely should. But yeah, maybe I should put that more of a priority. I do have, that having been said, if you go to any of the videos, any of the podcast episodes, let me actually jump up one and I'll show you. If you scroll down, you can see a complete list of the gear that I use when I am making the videos, such as the mics that I'm using, the controllers, my interface, the headphones and everything that I use, input devices, cameras, lights, including some Amazon affiliate links. So if you want to, flip a coin to your podcaster, then that will put a couple of pennies in my pocket without costing you anything. And so you can check that out. Excellent. What else? Any other questions, folks? These have been fantastic questions. Really appreciate the questions and appreciate you hanging out. But we'll give it another couple of minutes to see if anybody else has any questions. Reed asks, do I have time to answer a question you posted in the event? I thought I did, Reed. My apologies. You know what? Yes, you even mentioned that 100%. Sorry, I looked at it and then I was like, I thought I answered that. Okay, so Reed asks, reviewing your cue breakdowns for hip hop underscores, you go into great detail about density layering over texture layering. That makes sense. However, at times I see that extra texture layers are added to enhance the cue, such as extra percussion layers. How much is too much? Maybe just one extra layer? Also, what are typical moods you want to evoke for hip hop underscore sports type cues? Are they supposed to be upbeat, or can there be a variety of moods? There can be. Let me answer the last question first. Well, first, let's kind of define what we mean when we say hip hop underscore. Hip hop underscore isn't the type of hip hop cue that needs to be overly aggressive. It doesn't need to underscore action necessarily. It's not super high energy necessarily, but it really needs to sit under dialogue, which means we kind of dial back, some of the transientness of it, some of the forward aggression. And so there are more kind of upbeat underscore hip hop cues where there may be in a major key, maybe a little bouncier, maybe using some loops and samples to kind of get a boom bappy vibe. You could also have like trap style underscore cues that kind of take a page out of tension cues. In fact, you can take like a tension cue and put some trap beats, like with some stutter hats and some chirpy snares and claps and some 808s, and you got yourself a pretty darn effective like tension hip hop underscore. But either way, you just want to think kind of whatever mood it is. Melancholy, uplifting, inspirational, tense, suspenseful, whatever, but it has to sit under dialogue. And so all of the hip hop elements can't be so transient and so forward in the mix that they can pull focus. So starting with that, as far as your second or the first part of your question, which was texture layers added to enhance the cue. Sometimes it's a little bit instinct, like we need something else here. But looking at the and I know this is an epic orchestral hip hop cue for like highlights or graphics or whatever, but the same kind of concept applies. I think as I am going forward, like every 4 bars, I want to make sure that I am heightening the energy of the cue. And so I'll go forward 4 bars and say, okay, what am I adding? Am I adding another layer? Or am I adding density into the layers? Then I'll go forward again. Am I adding another layer, or am I adding density? And then I'll go again. So every 4 bars, I'll just kind of take inventory. And sometimes you can add just a little subtle something to create a sense of rising energy without adding a new layer, to create a smoother acceleration through the opening developmental arc. To borrow a taxi term, developmental arc. Okay, so the smoother that incline is, then the more gradual the energetic build will seem. So for hip hop underscore cues, because we don't want them to be overly aggressive, you can get away with a gentler slope of energy. And so as I'm going 4 bars, every 4 bars, I'm looking at the next 4 bars. What do I need to add here? Then I will either pull the new texture lever, or I'll pull the density lever. Keep also in mind that underscore cues can bend more towards commercial form, where you're usually an intro. The intros could be a little bit longer, more protracted than like a sports cue. Like this cue, this hip hop cue comes in really strong. It's not some really slow, drawn out intro. Whereas if you're writing a 2 to 3 minute underscore cue, then you can take some time, because that an underscore cue at the end of the day is going to be edited by editors to line up with the video. And so they can do that. Sports cues, however, are almost always needle drops. All right. And even if you were writing underscore for sports, an underscore cue is probably not going to get needle dropped live in a broadcast underneath graphics or whatever. And so it's going to be sent off to their features department. And and they do the feature stories for like athletes and struggles, and are they donating to charities, and have they they'll cut to their home life and interview their friends or their parents or whatever. And so underscore cues they get edited much more than needle drop live cues like this. So you can use kind of a gentler slope. I wish there was like a hard, fast answer read to just say, you can, dial up your abacus and you do the calculus of, if you have X number of measures, then you can add Y number of layers to generate Z amount of developmental arc, right? I don't think there's a formula. I think it's just practice, and it's instinct. And that instinct only comes from doing it. Yep. Pete asks, I would like to get into composing hip hop sports cues. Are there these types of briefs in the briefing room? Boy, is there. And there is, because right now we are doing we're gathering cues for the NFL on CBS, and round 1 closes on this Sunday. But we will also have a brief for mid-season refresh. We also have sports cues that go for the basketball NCAA tournament, so basketball broadcasts. And so yeah, we do sports stuff all the time, and it's not necessarily. And this is breaking news, where I don't have a breaking news bulletin. In your mind, think breaking news for family folks. I've been talking with a publisher who is interested in also getting some sports cues. I'm just saying, word is out. And so it could be another bat signal brief. But I can say that things are looking really good to be able to write even more sports cues. I do want to make just a quick clarification about the briefing room. The briefing room, isn't trying. The point of the briefing room is to write to very specific briefs. There's usually only 1 or 2 at a time. Usually 1, but every now and then, like right now, it's like feast or famine over here. Right now we have 3 briefs all in process right now. Very rarely are there 3 briefs. We have one for the NFL on CBS. We have another one for horror and action trailers. We have another brief for The Ultimatum on Netflix, right? It's just this is how it goes, okay? But the point isn't to just join the family, spam the briefs, call it a day. No, fundamentally, our family subscription tier is about mentoring, ongoing coaching, and so submitting. You're getting feedback. You're coming to our weekly feedback sessions. You're submitting for videos. You're doing one-on-ones, and so yeah. So I want to manage expectations. This is very narrow focused, mentor based, coaching based relationships with publishers that I have a personal relationship with. We're not going out and just vacuuming up every publisher we can find just so we can spam briefs. It's not what we're doing here at all. It's not what we're doing. Excellent, Reed. Glad that was helpful. And thanks, Pete. Glad you enjoyed that. Troy says, "Come at me, bro." To Troy's revenge. Appreciate that, man. Appreciate that. Let's do one final refresh over here to make sure that I am not missing anybody's question. Otherwise, we might call it a day here. Is everybody feeling good? Feeling good, man. That is a quick hour and 15 minutes. But as always, guys, thank you so much for your support. Thank you for watching the podcast. Whether you are a paid subscriber or not, whether you're a member of the community or not, if you are with me right now, if you are watching or listening or whatever, just know you're one of my people. And I appreciate you. I love you. And I'm so glad to be on this journey with you and being able to help in any way that I can. By the way, speaking of help, one way that you can help me, Reed says, is by liking the video, giving us a review on podcasts. If you don't want to subscribe by now, you know to subscribe, but thumbs up, chatting, giving me a comment, all of that stuff is super helpful. It really does help other composers just like you. However you found me, you can help somebody else find me. And so just know that I would be filled with eternal appreciation if you were to do that for me. But that's going to do it for me today. You definitely want to tune in next week because, guys, we got to talk about SoundCloud. I've been with SoundCloud since 2011. I have over 70 hours of music up there. And this AI stuff, I think I'm out. I think I'm going to have to leave SoundCloud and move my 1,063 tracks. But that's for next week. I hope you've had a good week. And if you haven't, I know that this week is going to be better. How do I know that? Because I believe that the universe has amazing plans just for you. Until next time, everybody, peace.